So first off, thank you so much for having me. This is an incredible opportunity, and thanks again to all the students who put this together. So education. You know, of all of the issues you're going to hear about today, I would argue that education is the worst. And not the worst that it like physically harms us the most. It's just the worst. You know, we all grew up, went through the same education system, and it makes us feel tired, it makes us feel despair, it makes us feel frustrated. You know, even Barack Obama can't get through a class without, you know, balling his head back and saying, is this really the best way? And every month, it's like we hear another study came out, oh, a new international test, America's last, or America fell. You know, American students, they're really confident, but, you know, not that bright. And so education is this seemingly intractable issue, but it's unique in that we've all experienced it. And so what's strange is, why is this? Why is the system so terrible? Because when you think about the idea of learning, which is this act that the education system is meant to facilitate, that actually produces completely different feelings in our mind. You know, I bet even hearing that word is this idea of unleashing our minds, becoming better versions of ourselves, exploring our curiosity, you know, feeling motivated, feeling empowered. Even today, in today's world with digital connectivity, I would argue learning something new, and the idea of that even is, you know, dare I say, cool. And this is me, if you're curious, in 9th grade. And yes, that is a real goatee. It took me about 18 months to grow. This was the only time in my life where I was cool. It's my license to cool phase. But, you know, going through college, that's when my intellectual curiosity really took off. And like many of us, I feel like we shared that experience. And so I started asking myself, why is this? Why is the education experience and system so intractable and so boring? And at the end of my Emory experience, I graduated back in 2012. I was a philosophy major, so my career path wasn't exactly carved out. And Teach for America actually provided me with the opportunity to jump into the classroom and find out what exactly was up in education. So I became a high school teacher. I taught 9th and 10th grade social studies here in Atlanta. And it was almost a cliche where I taught at this point. I taught at Banneker High School. It's a great school here in Atlanta. But at the time, it was struggling. 42% graduation rate. You know, 97% of the students qualified for free and reduced lunch, which means they are at or below the poverty line. And, you know, just historically in the last 10, 15 years, Banneker was not having a lot of success. And in my first year, I ran into a lot of the same problems you'd expect. Oh, we need more teachers, or the standards are outdated, the books are outdated. We just need more culture, we need a better energy. But none of those really felt like the fundamental issue, because something wasn't right, something wasn't hidden for me. So my second year, I actually figured it out, I think. I had a moment, and it's when I met Natasha. My second year, I was teaching world history, 10th grade class. And in Georgia, like in many states, world history is actually a required course in order to graduate. And so it was second semester, and every semester you get a new set of kids. Natasha was in my 4th period class on my B day, 38 kids in the classroom. It was really a show, I must say. But Natasha was not like every other student in the class. She wasn't a 10th grader. She was actually a 12th grader. She was an 18-year-old, and she had failed world history the first time around. And so it was springtime, her last semester, and she needed to pass my class in order to graduate. So here she is, start of the semester, really motivated, I'm motivated, we start off well, she's doing okay. But it quickly became clear to me that Natasha, like a lot of her peers, and anybody who's taught in underserved schools know that this is actually a widespread issue, that she was well behind academically. You know, her reading and writing were probably actually closer to a 5th or a 6th grade level. Her math was probably in that area as well. And my course is a lot based on writing and reading and all that kind of stuff that you do in world history. And so over the course of the semester, Natasha began to struggle. Fast forward, we're a week away from when I have to submit grades. And I look up at my grade book, and Natasha's grade's at a 55. Now, in Georgia, or in Fulton County, I should say, you need a 70% in order to pass a class. At that moment, I knew there was no statistical way that Natasha could pass this class. And I had offered her a tutorial, I'd offered extra credit, recovery packets, extra tests. These are all things that in underserved schools we're oftentimes almost forced to do by our principals because our students are struggling being so behind. And yet here Natasha is at 18, and she's got a 55. So this is where I was put into a dilemma that also sparked some inspiration. I was sitting there and I was deciding, do I pass Natasha or do I fail her? Now I bet everybody's sitting here and your gut reaction was the same exact as mine. Natasha earned a 55. It's unfortunate. She could have made better choices. She could have taken advantage of extra credit, of recovery, of tutorial. And so Natasha earned a 55, and I need to stand on the integrity of the class, stand on the principle of the class, and all the students who actually put in a lot of work and got passing grades. And so Natasha should earn her failing grade. I think viscerally that just feels like the right thing because she's facing the consequences of her actions. However, at this point in time, I decided to take a step back. And I said to myself, okay, well, let's look at the other side of the coin. What happens if I fail Natasha? Natasha's 18. She comes from a school where a lot of kids drop out. Most don't actually finish. And so if I fail Natasha, she's not going to graduate. Yeah, maybe she'll come back in the summer or in the fall to get that one credit back up. But the likelihood of that actually happening is really slim. And so to me, is Natasha responsible completely? I mean, definitely bears some responsibility, but is it all her fault that she ended up in world history again, spring semester, senior year, and her life trajectory could be altered because of the fact that she couldn't master my world history class where we're talking about stuff that happened 5,000 years ago that honestly is not that relevant to her, not that relevant to me, but here we are. And so if I fail her, I'm going to drastically alter her life prospects. Without a high school diploma in our country and our world right now, it's really, really challenging. You really do not have a ton of options. And so I asked, what would you do? Do you pass her and, honestly save her trajectory, save her prospects? Or do you fail her and stand on principle? Because if you stand on principle, you're not actually going to fix the system in that moment. And that's when it hit me. Why am I in this scenario? Why, as a teacher, am I sitting there having to face this ethical dilemma that, in all truthfulness, came up many times for me and many other teachers I knew? That's kind of the beauty of Teacher America, is you get to know a lot of teachers at different schools, and we all face very similar problems. And I was thinking to myself, why is this happening? I feel like I'm in the dark. I feel like there's no guiding principle. I don't know what the education system's meant to be doing, and so I don't know how to make this decision for Natasha. And that's where the question came to me. What is the goal of education, after all? Can anybody agree upon it? Does anybody have an agreed upon definition of education and why we do it in the first place? What's the vision? Where are we going with this? And now that I've worked in education and policy in the nonprofit sector and in the classroom, I've realized nobody really knows. If you asked everybody in this room and everybody in education, you would get tons of different answers. Some people today say the point of education is to make everybody college and career ready. Other people say it's to develop a love of learning, or a globally competitive workforce, or to earn a college degree and go to college, or to get a job even. All these things depend on who you ask. So if we think about Natasha, in that scenario, if it's college and career ready, well, what does that mean? I mean, she's definitely not college ready from a skill standpoint. She could be career ready depending on what career you're talking about. But we don't really know because no one's told us. No one's decided. No one's defined what that means. If it's develop a love of learning, how do you measure that? How do you teach that? Globally competitive workforce, that can be something completely different. And so as teachers and as educators, there is no North Star. There is no guiding light. There is no purpose. There's no clearly defined goal, and that's the problem. So why is this so difficult? Why is this question and this system so intractable at this point? I think it comes down to two things. The first one's fairly obvious. The education system as we know it was started in the Industrial Revolution, and it was not meant for what it is today. It was originally meant for routine, to teach people basic skills so they can work in factories or in the administrative state. And it's just been growing and growing and growing for the last 100 years. And we've just been trying to fix it and force everything that's new into it. The second is actually a deeper question. Education is how we prepare ourselves, is how we prepare our children. And so another reason why it's so challenging for us to agree on the goal is because deciding what education is about is actually deciding what our purpose of our lives should be. If the purpose of our lives is to be productive, then yeah, education should probably be about routine and rigidity and just doing the same thing over and over until you produce as much as you possibly can. If it's about personal exploration, then it should be about discovery. It should be about challenging ourselves, exploring each other and collaborating and all of that. If it's about sitting in front of screens and phones and TVs all day, then maybe it should just be that. Maybe we should start earlier. As you can see, some people think we're headed in that direction already. And since we have no agreed upon goal, we've ended up in a credential-driven system. So here's a short graph from the Georgia Public Policy Institute. It's a research study done a few years ago that honestly tells us a lot that we already know. By 2020, 65% of all jobs will require some college or more. And then 88% of all jobs will require at least a high school diploma. So if Natasha doesn't get her diploma, she's pretty much out of luck. I mean, there's very, very few job prospects. And honestly, they're probably jobs that aren't going to lead to sustainability, to stability, to a feeling of prosperity. And so we're in this credential-driven society where a lot of times it doesn't even matter what you studied. For any seniors in the room, you're probably looking at jobs right now, and it just says bachelor's degree required. And maybe it lists 10 majors, but they don't really care what you studied. They just care, can you learn? Are you capable? Are you resourceful? But we have what now has turned into a really elaborate filtering system. You know, if Natasha gets that high school diploma, it does not reflect her skill set by any means. As I told you, she's on a 5th or 6th grade reading and writing level. But she's got the piece of paper, so does it really matter? Now, I'd ask people to imagine, if we're in a credential-driven system, what does success look like? What does the ideal credential-driven system look like? Is it really everybody has a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree? I think it takes everybody in this room probably less than 5 seconds to realize that that reality would be horrific. It wouldn't work. Everybody would be overqualified for all of the jobs that the majority of our economy is based off of, and nobody would want to do them. We're honestly not far from that right now. And so this can't be the way this should be. When people look at the education system from the highest level, and that's what we really need to start thinking about, because we need to find solutions that scale. A lot of people in the state and federal policy levels, honestly, they look at it like it's a factory. Now, when you hear that, you probably think it's very negative. And most of the times when people talk about factories in education, they mean it in a very negative way. But I would argue that a factory isn't a bad analogy, because when you think at a massive, national scale, we need it to be as consistent and as efficient as a factory. We need it to be repeatable and consistent, where we churn out competent after competent after competent person who can really push our society forward. The problem with this analogy is that we are so far from being a factory. We are nowhere close to this efficiency. And this takes the humanity out of learning. What we're actually a lot closer to is something like this. If you guys are familiar with the Rube Goldberg concept, it's basically you just put a bunch of random stuff together and they all do something that essentially pushes out something really simple. So in this one, we've got a clock that sets off a firework that hits a bird or something, and then eventually it just wipes the guy's face with a napkin. That's the goal of it. That's what education is right now. Every year it's something different. Oh, this year it's standards, or it's class sizes, or it's STEM, or it's the size of the school, or we need more of this type of school. It's all these little tweaks that we think are getting at the fundamental problem, and it's just this one tweak, and once we do that, then we're good. It'll start churning out more kids who are ready. I'm here to argue that that is so far from the truth, and that in reality, we're much more like a ship. We're a ship in the dead of night, drifting in the dark. There's no compass, there's no destination, there's no stars to guide us. And every year we're just making these slight course corrections, thinking that we're going in the right direction. But we're really just drifting and we have no direction. And so what I want to do is lay out a few fundamental truths about education so that we can stop talking about them and start getting past it and think differently about the educational experience. Because we spend most of our time in the education policy world arguing about the same things. So the first truth that I've recognized and everybody needs to come to grips with is we will never have an excellent teacher in every single classroom. It's a fact. It's a physical reality. There is no possible way to have an excellent teacher in every classroom. There are 3.1 million teachers in America. There has never been a 3.1 million person workforce where everybody is excellent. So we need to just accept that fact and move on. Number two, things like charter schools and school choice should be looked at as iterations, not as innovations. And I'm not against charter schools at all. I think we need R&D in education. Education is unique in that our users are also our products. And so we need to be thinking about new ways to do this experience, and charter schools can do that. But the vast majority of them, and there are a few that really push the boundaries and challenge the status quo, but the vast majority are really just changing and tweaking little things. Oh, this charter school has tiny classes, or this school has a longer school day, or this school only serves this type of student. Again, those are tweaks on the existing failing model, in my opinion. And things like school choice, the idea where students can opt into the lottery for any school in their city, that relies on a lot of middle-class assumptions, that students have the wherewithal and the internet access to get into a lottery, and that they have the transportation to actually consistently take advantage of that school choice. And that's why you see a lot of cities who have school choice, they show clear gains in the short term, but then when you dig deeper into the data, the same students are still struggling. Lastly, beyond the fundamentals of reading, writing, math, critical thinking, a hard skills approach to education will never keep up. So whether it's cursive or CAD or coding, these skills always become obsolete just at the time where we get almost okay at doing them. Take coding, for example. That's like the big skill today. Everybody needs to learn coding. But as you guys probably are aware, we have these coding boot camps out there, right? 12 to 14-week programs that teach anybody how to code, as long as you have a high school diploma. So you're telling me we could teach anybody with a high school diploma how to code in 12 weeks. Why would we spend 4 to 8 years in the K-12 system teaching them that? Why not make that part of corporate responsibility, train their own workers? They do that anyways. The majority of, and for the students in the room, the majority of what you're going to do in your job, you learn on the job. I never trained to be an executive director or a teacher, really, even. Most of my colleagues and my friends didn't train to be the position they're doing today. They're just resourceful, capable, collaborative, critical thinkers. So focusing on hard skills and trying to force them into the educational experience will never keep up. Okay, so what can we do? Because I think in our guts, we all know that education can be so much more. It can be a place where intellectual curiosity is fostered every single day, because we've all experienced that moment. Right now, we think about engineering the environment. We focus on the school building. We focus on the teacher, the technology, how many kids are in the classroom. And this is engineering the environment, and these are all factors that influence education, but they're not fundamental to the success. And I know that because I had different teachers than you. I was in a different school building than you. I had different standards than you. I had different technology than you. My classes were a different size than you. And yet we're all here. We're all in this room achieving some level of success. So it can't be these things that are fundamental. What we need to do is instead get into the mind of a student. Really think about the student experience. How are they experiencing these different concepts? How are they relating them? How can we get kids inspired instead of keeping them in line? How can we, instead of promoting compliance, promote creativity and collaboration? How can we get students in focus and in flow instead of in routine? We need to start thinking about how students experience this so we develop their skills and their individuality together. And we need to start thinking about it at scale. Because until we do, more and more students and educators like myself, my colleagues, Natasha, will be in these terrible scenarios where we have no guiding light, we have no idea where we're going, and we make these decisions that end up just crippling our society year after year after year. And we'll continue to be teaching in the dark. Thank you.